The inauguration is next week. We have a new administration coming in, and there are a number of things that they're going to have to be taken care of as far as the economy is concerned. First off, how did Nigeria's economy perform under the last administration over the last 8 years? This is, of course, the GDP growth for Nigeria, looking at from 2015 all the way to 2022. The big red figure you're seeing there is 1.85%. That was when the oil prices crashed in 2016, and there was the first of two recessions over the span of this administration. 2015, when they first came into office, 2.79%. Oil prices nosedive 1.58, and then the recovery begins. 0.82% in 2017, 1.91% in 2018. 2.27% in 2019, and then you've got another big drop. COVID-19, the lockdowns, the oil prices falling, economies contracting. 1.92% is where the economy in 2020 fell to, and then you had a recovery again. Base effects in 2021, the economy growing by 3.4%, and then in 2022 to 3.10. Now, keep in mind, population growth is just at 3%, so you've got to be growing faster than your population. If we average out the economic growth over the last 8 years under the administration, you average those figures out, you get 1.35%. And so this is exactly what the new administration is going to have to deal with respect to getting the economy back on the right side. So now we're going to be talking to Dr. Andrew Nevin, who is an advisory partner and chief economist with PwC Nigeria. He's with us from our Abuja studios. Dr. Nevin, it's great to have you on the show. Good morning to you. A whole lot to discuss. You just saw that average 1.35% GDP growth over the last 8 years. What should the incoming administration be targeting, Dr. Nevin? 5%, 8%? Can you give us a number?
Well, you know, Rodas, I don't like to make predictions about the future, but I mean, we've said for years that we should be targeting at least 6 to 8%. And then 10% in some years is possible. We think that's doable. So I think 6 to 8% is a reasonable target for the incoming administration of President-elect Tinubu to come in with. But we would like to see some 10% years in there as well. 10% would be great. So 2023 is a transition year, but the economy is still chugging along, Dr. Nevin. We have, some growth forecasts. Federal government says 3.75% for 2023. I think the IMF is about 3%. The World Bank is at 2.9%. What do you make of those forecasts? And I guess, I know you don't want to make predictions, but are they reasonable with respect to the economic forecast for where Nigeria should be in 2023? Well, to begin with, Rodas, over the years, I've sort of been very critical of this use of official statistics. I mean, to give you a simple example, people talk about an economy being about $290 billion back in 2010, and then we rebased it, and suddenly it was $500 billion. So what happened to all the economists who were on television when it was 290 talking about 290, right? We're coming up to a rebasing here. I don't think we know the real size of the Nigerian economy. We know over 50% is informal. We know that the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics has been reluctant to really dive into how big the informal economy is, or the amount of the informal economy that's captured in the official numbers. So I don't want to respond to the official numbers, and I think, in fact, the way we collect the statistics is not correct. And we're going to another rebasing. The economy, if I had to guess, I don't like giving forecasts, but I think it's probably 25% bigger on that. So then we come back to use this number 3.1, 3.0, 2.9, 3.9 versus our current economy, to me is a little bit, doesn't make a lot of a sense. What I would say is I think the Nigerian economy is bigger than we think, because we don't capture all the informal economy. I'll give you a simple example. I was with someone yesterday who taught me something I don't know, which is that Sokoto exports garlic overland to Morocco on that. And I'm pretty sure that's an export that's not, which is fantastic for the country, is not captured on official statistics. And I think if there's a lot of that going on. And I think when we do the rebasing, the economy will be a lot bigger. But in terms of the growth we expect, I don't want to hear anything with a 3. I certainly don't want to hear anything with a 2. This incoming administration should be looking for, in its first year, getting at least to a 4, possibly a 5, and then over its term at least 6 to 8, with aiming for some 10s in there. That's what I want to see.
You got to be ambitious. You have to be ambitious with those growth numbers. Thank you for that. We put together a to-do list.
Well, I don't think that, I don't think that, Rodas.
Yeah.
It's not ambitious. I mean, China did it for 30 years. It's what we should be doing. I mean, 2, 3, 4% is just not acceptable given the capabilities in this country and the potential in this country. We cannot be talking 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, certainly not 2. We can't be talking 3, 4% either.
All right, thanks for the clarification there. All right, so we put together a to-do list, if you will, for the president-elect. He's got to put together a team very quickly, an economic team. He's also got to face fuel subsidies, whether he's going to keep them, remove them, insecurity, the debts, including the CBN debt, revenue issues, and jobs. Now, we don't have power yet. I'm going to ask you about power, but what do you make of the list? What do you think are his top priorities coming in?
Well, let me start out by saying I think that anyone who has experience in the world, broadly, and I've been around a long time, as you know, I won't tell you how old I am, but it's a long time, understands that any organization, and particularly any administration, can only do a few things. And if we go back a little bit in history, Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which I had to read every page of because of my role, I think was over 300 pages. The National Development Plan was just replaced at over 300 pages. There's been a complexity in the way that the government's approached the economy, which doesn't work. So the first thing I would say is the new incoming administration, I fully expect this, will need to focus on just a few things. So, what are the things what do they need to focus on? Number one economic issue is insecurity on that, because it's having a massive impact on our ability, inflation, food security, food supply. It's continuing to import on that. Now, I can't comment on the right policies. What I can say is, as an economist, that's the number one issue to focus on. Number two issue to focus on is the complexity of the federal government. So we had the Orange report in 2013. Nothing happened to it. His Excellency President Buhari actually assented to the implementation of it in March of 2020. So just as COVID, or April perhaps, just as COVID was coming, nothing's happened to it. We need to address that complexity in the federal government. Third priority, why are we having such difficulty? People come onto television and they say we're having economic difficulty because of external events, because of the Russians invaded Ukraine. In fact, I mean, as tragic as this is from an economic viewpoint, Nigeria should be benefiting from the invasion of Ukraine by Russia because oil prices went so high. But while that invasion was going on, of course, we've seen, for longer, really for about 4 or 5 years, we've seen a collapse in oil volumes. We got as low as 1.0. When I came to this country, we were close to 2. Many years we were 1.6, 1.7. We've gone to 1.0, maybe back up to 1.2. And yet we subsidize 650,000 barrels a day. So if you think about the mathematics of this, I mean, it's just been incredibly difficult for us because the country has allowed oil production to decline so precipitously and then at high prices subsidizes oil. I mean, the net result, I think most people listening probably know this, but there has been zero transfer from NNPC to the Federation account in 2022, zero transfer in 2023, so at least 18 months, and a very small transfer in 2021 and 2020. So people keep saying this is an oil country. In fact, oil is delivering no value to us. So the third priority for the government is to get the oil production up back there. Now, we can set an ambitious target for that, but at a minimum, we need to get back to that 2014-2015 volume of 1.6, 1.7%. So those are the first three priorities. The fourth priority is, of course, sorry, go ahead, Rodas. You probably want to speak at this point.
Go right ahead. I thought you were done. Go right ahead. The fourth priority, yes. I want to get your priorities. Go ahead.
So fourth priority has to be, I'll even put it ahead of the foil subsidy, which is the FX regime. So, I mean, we're a very large open economy. We're connected globally all around the world on that. We import a lot. We export a lot. Increasingly, we export grain exports. I think we've discussed on the show on that. We need inputs from around the world to do what we want to do on that. The FX regime is destroying the economy. We said 7 years ago, I think, that it would be impossible to get enough investment in the country as long as we maintain this FX regime. What we said at the time has come true. I think people widely understand the FX regime has to go. And there's no successful path forward where an individual has to apply to the CBN to get foreign exchange. If you need foreign exchange, you go to the bank. And of course, the CBN has said this too, market determined exchange rates, willing buyer, willing seller. So the sooner we get to that, the better. The fifth priority, of course, is the foil subsidy. I mean, the numbers are so extraordinary, no one can keep up with them. I think it's on an annual basis 6 or 7 trillion naira right now. And there needs to be a path to get off of that foil subsidy on there. I mean, it was just a tragedy to watch that much resources being spent on the foil subsidy, bigger than the entire federal budget for education, social services, and healthcare put together. We had an ASU strike. When I saw the numbers to settle the ASU strike, I really wept on that because we lost an entire year of post-secondary education for hundreds of thousands of Nigerian students for a small amount of money, and yet we send 6 or 7 trillion naira on the foil subsidy. So that has to come to an end. Now, exactly how that's done and the palliatives that dealt with it, that the administration can work itself out. But all three major presidential candidates said the foil subsidy would come to the end. The administration of President-elect, His Excellency Tinubu, have said it will come to an end. So I'm pretty sure they're working out a path on that. And then the sixth priority I would put for this government is reviving dead assets, or knowing what to do with dead assets. I mean, we put out the paper a number of years ago. We said, look, the country is a rich country. Unfortunately, we have too many assets that don't produce a return or actually cost the country money. So we have the obvious ones like Agiokuta Steel, the 3 refineries that don't produce any refined product, the National Stadium, the National Theatre. I think there's widespread recognition that they need to produce a return in some form. And of course, I think that it was the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning put together MAFI recently, which is the investment arm for the federal government to look at these assets. So those are 6 priorities to start with. As I said, we don't want to add too many more to that list because a government cannot do too many things. And we've suffered in the economic plans in the past, in my view, from having too many so-called priorities and then none of them get done.
Thank you so much for that breakdown, Dr. Nevin. And your point was very well made on the Russia-Ukraine war. Angola, we talked about it on the morning show today on the African Business Update. The Kwanzaa has strengthened, their FX reserves are rising, they're looking at cutting interest rates, and inflation is coming down in Angola as well. So, I mean, they've definitely benefited from the war. I want to ask you about power. What are the next steps for Nigeria's power sector for the administration coming in?
Well, I mean, I think I was my own industry, and of course, most of my job is not being an economist. I don't want to be critical of others, but I think sitting in your office looking at economic statistics doesn't give you a very good sense of the economy. Most of my time is spent in the economy with clients, and my own sector is financial services. So working here in the country with SEC, with CBN, with the banks, with the investment banks, stock exchange, FMDQ, Nigerian Stock Exchange, and it's been a great experience working with all those institutions. So when the power reforms came in 2013, I didn't know much about power. I just assumed, privatization probably makes sense. It can't be worse than NEPA. But I was proved wrong by that. I mean, the last 10 years in the power sector have really been dismal. Immense amounts of money have been spent, not only the government's money, but interventions financed by AFDB and World Bank. And we're really behind where we were on that. So I think, and I've said many times, that in fact power should be a state-level matter. I mean, if you look around the world, many successful countries, including Canada, where I'm from, but it would also be true in India, where it's a state matter, provincial matter, of course, in Canada. It works perfectly fine, but particularly with the way power technology has evolved. So when I grew up in a small town near Niagara Falls in Canada, so you think of big power, big grid, generating it all in one place. So it made sense to have a large grid system and one single kind of utility provider. But there's many more technologies for producing power. I mean, you have small-scale solar, whether it's at the individual level or at the mini-grid level. You have things like much smaller gas turbines on that. So the economics have changed, and you can really produce power much more at a local level. So I think that the step that the government took recently to make it on the concurrent list is fantastic. It shows the direction of travel. I think if you said to states, look, you figure out how to produce power, what is optimal for your state and your needs, I think we'll go a long way to that. And people then come back and say, but what about the national grid? Well, in Canada or India, there is no national grid. All that happens is that you get together with your neighbor and work out your wheeling arrangements, who's making excess power at what times, what the pricing is at. It works out fine around the world. So I think if it's decentralized, particularly because of modern technology, we'll go a long way to it. But what we've had before, where we've had a massive attempt at a major centralized system, we've had the system broken up into DISCOs, GENCOs, the national grid, NBET. I mean, it hasn't worked at all for us on that way. So I think we need a really new direction on that. But as I said, I think that putting it on the concurrent list is really an admission that if the states take the lead on the power, we'll get a lot further in the next few years.
All right, I have to ask you about inflation, global topic, also very, it's impacting Nigerians here. The World Bank, in their 2022 report, saying that 30,000 naira minimum wage in 2019 was worth 19,355 naira in 2022. So a loss of about 35.48%, right? And I think cumulatively they said from 2019 through 2022, inflation was about 55%. Also, they said inflation in Nigeria pushed 5 million people into poverty in 2022. And then between 2020 and 2022, 8 million people, or rather 2020 to 2021, 8 million people were pushed into poverty. Dr. Nevin, how do we tackle inflation in Nigeria?
Well, I mean, people talk about this as a global problem, but I mean, if we look at countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, I mean, they caused their own inflation through the quantitative easing programs over the 2010s. So, I mean, I was here during the financial crisis in 2008. The response was this unprecedented quantitative easing, the creation of money. People said it wasn't causing inflation. Well, eventually the inflation surfaced. I mean, there's a classic economic definition of inflation, which is too much money chasing too much goods. In our own case, Nigeria also caused inflation, and it caused it largely for two reasons that I've discussed a little earlier. One is the collapse in the production of oil. I mean, as you just said, Angola, I mean, the oil price is soaring. You're importing things, your exchange rate should be strengthening. Instead, we've watched it go to 750 naira to the dollar on the parallel market. So, of course, when we had 750 naira to the dollar, we're going to have massive inflation on that. And similarly, the security. I mean, why is food prices rising so high? Well, one of the major reasons is because of the insecurity. So farmers don't plant as much. There isn't as much. You have the same amount of naira or more naira because we print a lot of naira chasing the smaller amount of agricultural goods. So prices go up. So those two things, again, are the biggest determinants of our current inflation. So if we make improvements on those two dimensions, we're going to really bring inflation down. I don't think there should be, again, like so many things in this country or any country, there's no point in attacking the symptoms of what's causing inflation. We need to attack the underlying causes, and those are the two big underlying causes. If we improve our balance of payment situation through a bit more hydrocarbon production, and we improve our production, particularly of agricultural goods, through better security, we're going to see inflation come down.
Thanks, Doc. Another big topic is debts, Dr. Nevin. 46 trillion naira total public debt as at December of full year 2022. Another 23 trillion in CBN debt, the Ways and Means. World Bank saying debt service to revenue 96% in 2022. Federal government says it's about 80% between January and October of last year. How do you tackle debt? And the thing is, can the new administration avoid more borrowing, considering how precarious the fiscal structure is right now? It's been said that it doesn't look like they can avoid more borrowing. Well, what do we do here in this case, Dr. Nevin?
Well, I mean, we've said for years, I mean, people come along and say it's a debt problem, and then the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning says it's a revenue problem, and we all know we collect a small amount of revenue GDP. Our view is being pretty simple over the years. It's a growth problem. We grow at the 6 to 8% a year. This is going to go away. If we grow at 2 or 3%, we're heading for a crisis. It's that simple. So unless we have policies that get a higher headline GDP growth, we're going to have real problems on it. And of course, our debt is helped immediately by getting rid of the foil subsidy, because that's $6 or $7 trillion naira extra that we're borrowing because of the foil subsidy, and immediately that also takes pressure off of interest rates. So if we can get into a virtuous circle of foil subsidy removed, growth up 5, 6, 7, 8%. I don't think this is a huge issue, but if we only grow 2, 3, even 4%, yes, we're headed for a debt crisis on that. So again, our view continues to be it's not a debt problem, it's not a revenue problem or tax revenue problem, it's a growth problem, and we need the growth. And of course, we started saying this, I think, in 2016. and felt like we had time to grow, and we have never been alarmed. But at this point, we're running out of rope in terms of our debt profile. We need the growth to be able to pull ourselves out. But if we grow 6 to 8%, 1, 2, 3 years later, no one is going to be talking about the debt in Nigeria.
Gotcha. And so we touched on oil a moment ago, at least talking about oil prices and Angola and so on. OPEC, because I want to talk about revenue now. OPEC's May 2023 report, we're looking at oil production in Nigeria, about 1.3 million barrels per day in 2021, maybe at 1.2 in 2022. But April of this year, I think it fell to like 1.1 million barrels per day. I guess arresting oil theft and aging infrastructure, are those the two main, I guess the twin-headed dragon that has to be slayed when it comes to increasing oil production?
Well, it's hard for me. I'm not enough of an oil expert. I'm an FS expert. I've just watched the oil production decline, and I've watched the federal government allow it to decline and put us in this situation where we've had this rapid inflation, declining naira to the dollar on that. I mean, it's just, in a word, it's incredible to me that you would take what you think of as your most important resource or most important FX or earner and allow it to decline from 1.7 to 1.1 or 1.0 over. So there's been, we have to presume there's been some sort of neglect about it. I think the difference now, the last year or so, but also with the incoming administrations, people recognize we need to get that back up. So the exact tactics to do that, I'm not sure what they are, but I'm sure that there's a lot of focus on it. But there's also been one positive development. I mean, I don't want to, for us at least, because the invasion of Ukraine. Prior to that, the EU had basically said, look, we don't want to see any more gas assets. We're not going to really invest in any more gas assets. Gas is not a transition foil. With the invasion of Ukraine and realizing how dependent they were on Russia, of course, that's changed. So as we come into this period with a new administration, it's not just the increase in the production of oil, it's the increase in the production of gas to the extent we can. And of course, Spain is our largest client of gas, customer for gas. And there's, I think, a small window of opportunity to try to get the gas production up as well as the oil. But I think we all need to recognize this still has not a very long time to run. I don't think 10, 15 years from now, we're going to be able to produce more oil than we produce. If we may get it up to 2.0, I don't think we're going to be able to get it to 4 just from the viewpoint the world's not going to want that much oil in 10 or 15 years. So it still remains a bit of a stopgap, but a stopgap that we need between now and kind of 10 and 15 years from now on that. But let's put as much emphasis on getting the gas production up as the oil production.
All right. The president-elect has in his manifesto, he wants to get oil production, I believe, 2.6 or 2.7 million barrels per day by 2027. He wants to get it to 4 million barrels per day by 2030. Is that realistic?
It sounds difficult. I mean, it's great to have stretch targets. I mean, I think it would just make a big difference, as I said, to start to get it back to 1.7, then get it back to 2.2, which is what it was when I arrived. If we get it to 2.6 and the world's willing to accept it by others reducing because of course oil is peaking, the others will have to reduce their production. Absolutely fantastic. But let's just start by getting it to 1.7 and really stabilize our balance of payments.
Now, as far as production is concerned, I wanted to ask you about, so our wheat metrics, production is way lower than consumption. Same thing with dairy products, milk, and so on, sugar. How do we, and of course, this puts a lot of weight on our imports, so what we bring in, which of course has an impact on the exchange rate. How do we get to where we can improve production to meet up with consumption for a number of these commodities?
Well, I think, again, I go back, I'm not an economist sitting in my office, I'm out in the field all the time. I talk to a lot of people in agriculture. There is a huge amount going on in this country. So, private sector actors and state governors recognize the tremendous opportunity. So I'll give one example, palm oil. I mean, there's now big projects around the country. We're a big importer of palm oil. One in Edo State I know about, one in Ondo, one further east. I'm sure there are many others, 10,000 hectares minimum. I mean, those are the types of things that the private sector is going to pick up on. And so, as you say, what are the big areas we want? Palm oil, We want chicken, we want wheat. I mean, Sokoto is a state that can grow a lot of wheat, and we import, I think, about 90% of the wheat we produce. So people are on top of that. But I mean, if the federal government, rather than introduce new programs for these particular commodities, if they create that, as we always say, that enabling environment, particularly around the security, particularly around stabilizing the Naira, then these projects are going to emerge, and very rapidly. I mean, this country, everyone knows this country should be running a surplus in food. Brazil has shown it. I mean, we coined the term world food superpower, I think in 2010 for Nigeria. There's been a lot of activity on it. Rice has improved. I mean, His Excellency the President opened a new rice mill, I think either yesterday or is going to do today here in Abuja on that. So it's happening. So my urge to the federal government is let's focus on those fundamentals, particularly the security, particularly getting the oil production up to stabilize balance of payments, and all of these people that recognize the opportunity all around the nation, because every state, including Lagos, has a lot to offer in it. And so we said chicken, we said rice, we said palm oil, we said wheat. Also aquaculture, for example, there's been a lot of emphasis on as well. Dairy, so it's coming on that. So just get the fundamentals right, and I think the food security issue and the food economic issues will take care of themselves.
Dr. Nevin, finally, I want to ask you about jobs. Our last figures from the Bureau of Statistics, 33%, that was in Q4 2020. Haven't gotten any update on unemployment since then, but there are estimates that say it could be 40% or higher. I guess if you want to share your thoughts on what you think unemployment is right now, you're welcome to, but more crucially for the next administration, how do they create more jobs?
Yeah, a very good question. Okay, so I mean, I think our viewpoint is being consistent. In terms of exports, we like to focus on brain exports, so things that can be done digitally within the country. So exporting services, programming, animation, professional services, business processing, outsourcing, call centers. I mean, this has started in this country. People increasingly recognize it, and one of the reasons for that is right now, because of our physical infrastructure, because of our power issues, because of the port issues, it's difficult to export manufactured physical goods, but we can export digital goods. And we're doing it in Nollywood, music, financial services. I mean, you look at the Access UBAs of the world marching across Africa, Tiwa Savage singing at the coronation recently. It's fantastic. And of course, I have to mention, I think what'll end up being the biggest service export of Nigeria, but you have to do it physically, is of course football. So huge fan of Taiwo Awoniyi. I mean, he scored 4 goals in the last 2 games. He's going to keep Nottingham Forest up in the Premier League. So there we go. So we export services. But in terms of domestic job production, what we've said over the years is the number one industry is real estate. So residential construction. Why? Because it has all sorts of linkages. Everyone wants a place to live. It drove the economies, for example, in Canada, where I grew up in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And we have a housing deficit, not 17 million that the World Bank repeats, but still a large housing deficit on that. So we need residential housing. We need that sector to work. Absorbs a huge number of workers, masons, electricians, plumbers, caterers. It has backward integration into building supply materials. It has forward integration as people furnish their homes over time. So that's the number one job creation industry that we'd like to see focus on. So that has implications for things around Land Use Act, about what governors need to do at their local levels to make people secure in buying their homes and being able to cater a mortgage market. But if you want large-scale employment, we want the bringing exports at the export side, and domestically, many industries are important, but particularly residential housing on that. So the policies around that, including, of course, vocational training, would go a long way on fixing addressing the youth unemployment problem.
Dr. Nevin, we've talked about a whole lot. How realistic should Nigerians be about what to expect and what can be tackled within the next 4 years, and I guess within the next 8 if he is reelected?
Yeah, I mean, let me say, Rodas, I mean, I think people know who heard me speak. I'm incredibly optimistic, and I'm not optimistic, as I said, looking at the numbers in my office. I'm optimistic because every day almost I meet Nigerians doing incredible things in this country in every field of endeavor. So to give you an example, this week I met an amazing Dr. Teme Tope, who is a neurologist based in Ibadan, very eminent neurologist. She's the founder of O-Health, which is a telemedicine service that has almost 200 doctors on it, largely from our best medical center in the country in Ibadan on it, growing rapidly. She just took it upon herself to solve a big problem. And I see this multiplied so many times around Nigeria. And of course, we wrote the book about it, Self-Organizing Nigeria, people solving these big problems. So despite all the economic challenges we've had over the last number of years, people have continued to try to solve problems. I think the new administration has already signaled they're going to do a few of the things that I talked about today to make it easier for the economy to move in the direction it has to. So I'm incredibly optimistic. I know all the bad news. I live with that every day. But I also see, not the potential. I see people actually doing things. And I mentioned things in agriculture. I mean, the housing that I talked about, actually there's been huge progress around the country in different places. I was in Benin City the other day, and the housing market's doing very well there. So we actually have been making a lot of progress, not necessarily coming through official statistics, but on the ground in different states. And there are many more governors that realize that they have to develop a powerful economic strategy. I keep hearing about more and more interesting things in states that I wouldn't necessarily have known very much about. So when I take the totality of what I see on the ground and what this new administration has signaled it's going to do, I'm very optimistic. And I think that this country, because of all of its positives and assets it has, it won't take much to ignite the spark. And of course, I went to China the first time in 1983. It had only started its opening up at that point, but had 30 years of very strong economic growth. It's now a middle-income country. I actually think that the economic path of this country, given the position we're in, given our linkages with this incredible global Nigeria diaspora and with other major countries around the world, I think it's going to happen a lot faster in Nigeria. So, sometimes people say you're too optimistic, Andrew, but you really feel like we're at a cusp of really something very powerful and positive in Nigeria over the next few years.
Dr. Andrew Nevin, partner, chief economist at PwC Nigeria. We thank you so much for giving us your time today to talk about what lies ahead for the next administration. And it's good that we're ending on an optimistic, hopeful note. Thank you so much for your time.